Now, my hope for you is that you found time this season to celebrate. Celebrating as family, celebrating and reflecting upon the birth of Jesus, our Savior King. For Jen and I, this time of year is actually has some added celebration because in 2 days, on the 31st, we will be celebrating 14 years of marriage, which is pretty great. And you can say congratulations to Jen later because that's a feat that isn't just for anybody being married to me. But actually, to be honest, 14 years ago, we were right on this stage being pronounced husband and wife. We weren't attending here. Jen was, actually, and so we got married here, which is neat. And one of my favorite memories of that day was how Jen and I, we were actually right here. Jen and I decided that we were going to wash each other's feet during the service. And it was this really special moment where we were serving each other, showing that we were committed to servanthood in our marriage. And we had this beautiful music being played right here. My sister-in-law is a gifted and talented musician. She's playing and singing. It's this whole moment. It's beautiful. And I'm trying really hard to be overly sentimental, hey? And so I'm washing Jen's feet, taking my time, looking into her eyes, trying to be really, really, really romantic, yet really spiritual at the same time. And I'm crushing it, like I'm doing an amazing job. And I've never washed such good feet in my life. And I thought I was doing so good, but turns out, like I didn't realize that I needed to speed things up because I was trying so hard and taking so long that the song was almost done, and I'd only washed one foot. And so all of a sudden, Jen's like, let's go. And it's like, oh, quick. So I'm washing her feet, still trying to be sentimental. And then when it was Jen's turn, she had like maybe 30 seconds. We're untying shoes, ripping socks off. She's kind of splashing some water, getting everything back on. And it became something that, it was still nice, right? But it became a little awkward and really funny, to be honest. And one thing that I won't forget is how Jen, afterwards, after we were done, she let out a very obvious exhale. She looked at me, and she did one of these. And it was one of those moments, and some husbands might know what I mean, when breathing sounds less like breathing and more like disappointment and frustration. Those moments? That was kind of the moment in which I think Jen realized that this marriage was going to be a test, that it was going to test her patience, and it was going to test her ability to put up with all of my unique characteristics and quirks, which I think are charming, by the way, but I guess maybe I'm a bit biased. But it has been a really amazing and blessed 14 years of marriage. And it was definitely the best decision that Jen's ever made. And we have enjoyed each other's company in these last 14 years. But one thing I do actually treasure are the vows that Jen shared with me that day. On one of our anniversaries, Jen printed off a picture of us on our first anniversary. Somehow she let me take her to a Calgary Flames game. And on our first anniversary, that's love. And then below, she included her vows underneath here. And I love it, and I keep this in my office, and I keep it as a way to reflect upon it and to know how lucky I am to, yes, Brody, they beat the Oilers that day. I got to stay focused here. I keep this in my office as a way to know how lucky I am to be married to Jen and how blessed I am to be her husband. Later on, if you want, come and take a look. You'll recognize Jen. You'll never recognize me. It doesn't look like me at all. We should have put it up on the screen, but come and take a look later. But, vows are such an important part of a wedding ceremony, right? They are our promises. They're our commitments. They're our parts of the covenant that we have in this marriage relationship. And when I think of Christmas, this is exactly what God's doing. God is fulfilling his vows for us. He's fulfilling his commitments, his promises, his part of the covenant relationship that he has with us. By sending Jesus, he's fulfilling what he's promised so long ago, that he's coming to our rescue. And so God is fulfilling his vows. During this Advent season, we've talked about how God has done that. We've talked about, if you remember, when I preached on Mary, we talked about the booms and the whooshes that we tend to miss around Christmas, of this amazing story and the things that we take for granted because it's so familiar. But we've taken a look at how God has fulfilled his vows and how he's used people to make his fulfillment so meaningful. Well, if you brought your Bible with you this morning, I'll invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2 is where we're going to be focusing on this morning. Our goal during this series has been to look at those who were at the stable and how they were prepared for the coming of Jesus. And that is exactly what Advent is, the coming. And it's our preparation. We prepare for the coming of Jesus, his first coming, but we also prepare for the second coming of Jesus as well. Now, this morning we're going to be taking a look at the Magi, the wise men, and how they were prepared, how they were ready to meet this child, this newborn king. Well, let's read together Matthew 2, verses 1 to 12. If you don't have a Bible with you, that's fine. It'll be up here on the screen. Matthew 2, 1 to 12 reads this. It says, "After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, 'Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him.'" Now, actually, I want to stop right there, Paul, so if you can back up one. I want to stop right there because I think we need to take note of a few things here that we're noticing. First of all, these Magi have come to find Jesus, because Jesus is the one that they'd been waiting for. Jesus is the one who we are waiting for. He is the one who is to come. Jesus is the Messiah. He is the Savior. He is the long-awaited King, the rescuer of humanity. And these wise men are looking for him so that they may come and worship him. Now, it also tells us that they came when? They came after Jesus was born. It's actually assumed, and chances are very good, that Jesus is actually around the age of 2 at this point. He's a child, which means that even though the wise men here at the manger scene, they actually weren't at the stable. They came after he was born. They visited him in a home, not at the stable, not in a manger, like we often imagine. And it's also more than likely that there was more than 3 wise men. It just doesn't say that there was 3. Traditionally, we assume that there was 3 wise men. They even have names, but it doesn't say that there was 3. There could have been 4. There could have been 14. We just don't know, and it just doesn't say. But what we do know is that this group of Magi from the east were searching for the new king, and their intention was to come and to worship them in the manner of how a king is to be worshipped. Okay, so now let's get back into the passage. If you can go to the next one there. Verses 3 to 8 read, "When King Herod heard this," when he heard that this child had been born, this king had been born, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he called together all the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law, the people who should know kind of about this, he asked them where this Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Now at that point, Herod called the Magi secretly to him and found out from them the exact time that the star had appeared. Then he sent the Magi to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. And as soon as you find him, come back to me, report to me, so that I may go to and worship him." Well, let's pause there as well for a moment. One thing just to note of is that there were many different Herods in the Bible. This Herod is known as Herod the Builder. And now, this Herod wasn't from Jewish descent. However, Rome put him on the throne. They made him king of Judah in 40 BC. And Herod never sat very easy or very comfortable on the throne. He was very concerned all the time. It seemed as though he was panicked and he was insecure and paranoid. And so now he's obviously concerned about this report that a true heir to the throne of David has been born. And he became very insecure. And this was who he was. And in fact, he became more and more paranoid and frustrated to the point where he became very violent and cruel. And if we know the rest of the story of Herod, we see exactly that. Now, it's also important to mention that these magi probably weren't traveling alone. Chances are very good that they were coming with a large number of soldiers, of servants. They were coming with priests and officials. It would have been a huge entourage of people, possibly even counting into the hundreds, if not the thousands. So here is this huge group coming to Herod and saying, "Where is this new king? Where's your new king?" So of course he would have been panicked. Of course he would have been disturbed by this, because this might mean the potential of an uprising. This new king might bring war. It might overthrow his power, and he might lose his position. So there's Herod getting news of the king that's been born, the king that's rightfully from David, the king of Israel. But now he's wondering, hey, maybe this is a king who's going to rule over this eastern kingdom that's now represented here, most likely Babylon. So yes, he's frustrated. So there's the position of Herod. Let's keep reading verses 9 to 12. After they'd heard the king, so after the Magi had heard the king telling them to go find the child, they went on their way. And the star that they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. These wise men from the east were a group who followed a star. They visited Herod, and when they found Jesus, they were overjoyed, and they worshiped him. They worshiped this young child as the one who is the king. You know, I love it. It's such an amazing part of the Christmas narrative, but it also leaves us with many questions, doesn't it? It leaves us with questions such as, who exactly are these magi, and why were they there? Now, we know that they've come to worship Jesus. That's what they tell Herod they're going to do, and it's exactly what they do when they arrive. They worship Jesus. They acknowledge that the king has been born and that he is worthy of worship. This group of very unlikely men have come to find him, to worship him as a king. So that's why they're there. But really, why are they there? Why do they care about this child? Why does these Eastern men care about this Jewish child? So who were these guys? Who were the Magi? Well, here's what we know about the Magi. They were important and they were wise. They were wise men. They were admired for their understanding of astrology, of astronomy. They were respected for their knowledge of science, of mathematics, of history, and their ability to interpret dreams and all of their forms of different spirituality. Now, Magi often held key roles within the royal court of the Babylonian kingdom. They would often act as special advisors to the kings. Kings such as Nebuchadnezzar or King Balthazar, they were there as special advisors, especially to make sure the gods were happy with these kingdoms. And we have examples of Magi in the Old Testament, especially in the book of Daniel. In fact, Daniel was even appointed to be the chief of the Magi. In Daniel chapter 5, we've got King Balthazar, who is trying to figure out why there is this supernatural writing on the wall. He sees actually a human hand writing on the wall, and he doesn't know what it means. So he calls these magi to come and interpret it. In verse 7, it says, the king summoned the enchanters, the astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads these writings and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made to be the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Well, none of these magi that the king calls can interpret it, and so he sends them away, and then he's reminded of Daniel. Daniel, who was known to have the spirit of the holy gods in him. He was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom of that like the gods. In verse 11 to 12, this is where I'm referring to, and it says that King Nebuchadnezzar, which was the king before Balthazar, had appointed him chief of the magicians, chief of the magi. He was chief of the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. That is what magi did. You see, magi held very influential and powerful roles in Eastern kingdoms, especially Babylon, right up into the time of the birth of Jesus. So that's who the magi were. But what do they know about the birth of Jesus? What do they know about the Messiah, the promised king, and why do they care? Well, one thing that we need to remember is that there are many different captures of Israel by Babylon. And with that, many Jewish people were scattered into captivity into the Babylonian Empire. You would have had many Jewish people all throughout the Middle East. And as such, you had Jewish influence in this Babylonian Empire because of those who were living there, especially people like Daniel. So you'd have the Old Testament, you'd have the prophecies of God all being taught in these Eastern kingdoms because of those who had influence in that area. They would have known about God, and they would have known of the signs of the coming of the Messiah. And they would have listened to Daniel, especially because of Daniel's reputation. Daniel, if you'll remember, was very dynamic in his experience. Daniel, right, was thrown into the lion's den because he refused to bow down to the king. He was only committed to worshiping God. He was thrown into the lion's den because he was faithful to worship God, and he was faithful to proclaim his God. God spared his life. He saved him from the lions, and so now Daniel is respected. They listened to him because of this experience and because of his accurate prophecies and his ability to tell of what was going on. Even in this time with King Balthazar, he knew what this writing meant. Daniel was respected, and the rest of the Magi would have known about the promise of the coming Messiah. And they would have listened to him. They did listen to him to the point of even coming. And now the time had come. The king was born. But it wasn't just any king. This was the king. And these magi, they wanted a piece of this. They wanted to be a part of this world-leading king. So they were going to find him. And they knew how to get there. They knew the way to go because of this supernatural, observable phenomenon, the star. But that leaves us with another question, doesn't it? What is this star that rises and seems to move? Now, most scholars would suggest that this is more than just a star, that instead it is understood to be the shining of the glory of God. This is the glory of God that is moving and leading and directing these wise men. If you remember in Luke 2, verse 9, the angels are with the shepherds in the field, and they're around them, and all of a sudden the glory of the Lord shines around them. It shone around them. And this is what I think we have here. The glory of the Lord shining like a brilliant star. The glory of God appearing and shining. His star. You see, these wise men would have studied the stars. They would have known the stars, but this was something they had never seen before. This star that all of a sudden appeared, that rose and that moved. This was something more. This was the shining of the glory of God. In verse 9, we read that the star, when it rose, it went ahead of them until it stopped. You see, it was leading them. This star is like the shining of the glory of God in the Old Testament during the Exodus. The glory of God that was a cloud during the day and a pillar of fire during the night, all to lead the Israelites in the direction that God was wanting them to go. So again, we have this glory appearing and leading this large group of people to Jesus, the Messiah, the new King. In Numbers 24, verse 17, it says that a shining, that word for star, is better translated the shining. A shining will come out of Jacob. A star will come from Jacob. And Jesus is that shining. He is that star. He is the glory of God. So there's our story of the wise men coming from the east visiting Jesus. They made the journey, they followed a star to find the one that is the true king, and they came, and they bowed down before him. They brought him gifts, and they worshiped at the feet of this king, the feet of this child, the feet of Jesus. But my question is, why is this part of the Christmas story included? Why are the wise men so important in the Christmas narrative, and what does this mean for us? Well, first of all, it's meaningful because Jesus here is revealed as the king. He is the king, but not only for Israel. He's recognized by Gentiles and pagans as well. You see, this is one of our indications that God has come not just for Israel, but he's come for all people. He's come to save all people. He's come to save the saints and the sinners. He's come to save the religious and the non-religious. He's come to save the Jew and the Gentile, the likely and the unlikely. Jesus is the king who's come for all. And that's exactly one of our first takeaways and applications. This is who Jesus truly is as king, and that he's worthy of worship. That's number one for us this morning. Jesus is worthy of our worship. He's worthy of our worship. These magi who have come from a pagan culture, who are the least likely to come and worship Jesus, they were the ones that came. And they worship him in the same manner that a king would be worshiped. These magi knew what it meant to have a posture of worship before the king. They had spent countless hours in the royal throne room of the king, and they knew the posture that they had to have. It wasn't about standing proud with who they were. They knew that when they came before a king, they knelt down. They bowed before the throne. They bowed before the king. They would avert their eyes from him, and they would fall to their knees in adoration. They would do this because they knew where glory and honor was due, and it was towards the king. And this was the posture that these magi, these pagan wise men, had before this Jewish child, this Jesus. They had the posture of worshiping like a king. They worshiped him in that posture. And it makes us ask the question of, what is our posture of worship to the same Jesus? What is our posture? How do we worship Jesus? How do we know him and worship him as king? But another question I have is, what do we think about when we think of worship? What comes to mind when we think of worship? Do we think of just the songs that we sing? Do we think of the elements of our worship services on Sunday mornings? If that's all we know worship to be, we've missed out on how amazing worship is. You see, worship is not something that we can do through singing just alone. It's not something we do as an act once a week. Worship is a lifestyle. Worship is how we live. We live in worship. You know, we often come here on a Sunday morning and we want a passionate experience in worship, right? We want to have this meaningful worship. We want to feel something when we're worshiping. And we love to sing specific songs, and we like how we feel when we worship. But there's also others who aren't really happy always about, I wish we would sing more of this genre of song, or I don't like how we kind of do some of the order of our worship service. And we put so much emphasis on what we do here. And you know what's interesting? Maybe it's just me, but I want to ask you as well, have you ever heard this phrase? Have you ever heard the phrase of, I just didn't really get anything out of that worship service this morning? Have you ever heard that before? Have you ever said that before? I have, and I get it. I've been there. I've said those words. But I also have to tell you that if we're not worshiping God with the first 6 days of the week, there's no way we're going to have a meaningful worship of God on the seventh day. I read something recently where it said, can you imagine if the pastor and the worship team, the music team, came and they weren't prepared? I wasn't prepared to preach. Kevin and his team didn't really know what they wanted to play. Sure, what do you want to play? Sure, that sounds good. They were all over the place, and I'm just kind of off the cuff. Can you imagine how frustrated you'd be to be like, they weren't even ready for this? But then to put it on the other side, what about us? And I'm included. What if we came and we weren't prepared? We haven't spent time in worship. We haven't come knowing that this is where we're going to meet together and worship him together. what we do here on a Sunday morning is really set up by how we live in worship. So I want to encourage you to understand what worship is. True worship is not an action once a week. It's a way of life. Sunday mornings is only a part of what we do. And worship is dynamic, isn't it? In verse 11 of our passage, it says that the Magi fell down as a part of their worship. They worshiped him. But they also opened up their treasures, and they presented these gifts to Jesus. And I love this. I love this because there's no way that there were just these 3 little boxes of gold, a little bit of frankincense, a little bit of myrrh. No, these were treasures. There would have been treasure chests full of gold, full of frankincense, full of myrrh, and they're bringing them to this child. And I love that. But I also love what they're doing here because their giving is a direct reflection. It's a practical reflection of their worship. You see, when we give, when we enter into a time of offering, we're not giving out of obligation. We're not giving because it's something that we should do. We're not giving even out of a position of kind of feeling begrudging about our giving. No, giving is an act of worship. We give our gifts to Jesus. And that goes for our finances and our abilities and skills and gifts. We give them in worship. Giving should never feel like a task or something that we need to remember to do. Got to make sure I tithe before the 31st. No, it should be an outpouring of our worship to Jesus, knowing of our love for him and his love for us. We give because we realize that what we have, the jobs that we have, the friends and family that we have, the money that we have, the homes that we have, the gifts and abilities that we have, it's all come from the grace and kindness of Jesus, and it's all for his glory and kingdom. You see, those gifts that we have, they're not just for us, they're for him. And that goes for our pocketbooks and our lives. It goes for our money and our abilities. We give not because we need another volunteer. We give not because we're behind in our budget. We give because we know what we've received from Jesus and we give it back to him, recognizing that that gift came from him, and we give it back in worship. And of course, God doesn't need our money. We don't give because he needs it. We give because we worship him and we adore him. And it's an outflowing of who we know him to be in our lives. But really, knowing how we understand worship and knowing how we understand giving, that really boils down to asking the question and confessing who's truly on the throne of your life. So at this point, usually in the sermon, where it's warm in here, we're ready to get some attention. So I really want you to focus here for a moment and ask the question, who is sitting on the throne in your life? Because our second application and takeaway this morning is there are only 2 ways to respond to Advent and the coming of the King. There are only 2 ways to respond to Jesus. We either respond like Herod and we completely reject Jesus. Jesus is a threat in our lives. Or we respond like the Magi, who embrace Jesus, accept him, and they worship him. You know what's interesting is that the people who should have come to worship Jesus, they're not the ones who've come. Instead, those who should have cared less about this Jewish Messiah are the ones who come. The lowly shepherds and the pagan Magi. And they come down and worship him, bowing before his feet. How do we respond to Jesus? And that's an important question because the truth is our purpose in life. The reason why we were created, it isn't to be successful, it's not to earn money, and it's not even to find happiness. The goal of our lives, the reason why you were created was to know God and to worship him. Some people spend their entire lives trying to look for more, trying to look for happiness and purpose and meaning, trying to make a name for themselves, trying to make themselves their own king and Lord of their lives, hanging on to control and doing everything they can to refusing to let God reign and to let God sit on the throne that he deserves, just like Herod. Herod did everything he could to keep his control, to remain in power, even to the point of ordering the killing of all 2-year-old boys and under in the area of Bethany in the vicinity. And that's heartbreaking to think about what that means. You know, we think that's just kind of in the Bible, it's just a story. People would have been sitting in their homes, and these soldiers come in and kill their son. It's heartbreaking. And Herod did all of this just in an attempt to keep his throne, to keep his power, to keep his control. But that's why Jesus is good news, you see? Because those same things that Herod held on to so tightly, Jesus let go of. He let go of his throne on high. He let go of his own life so you may know why you were created and so you may be back in relationship with God. So I want to encourage you to let go of your own throne and your own praise, because there's so much freedom in following the ways of God, like Don talked about this morning. Because that star that led these wise men led in the ways of God that was so much more than they could have ever imagined. His ways are not our ways, and his ways lead to life everlasting. There are only two options in responding to Jesus. There is no middle ground. We either reject him like his own nation or embrace him like these pagan magi. John 1, 9-14 is how we're going to close here. And it says this, it says, the true light that gives life to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world. And though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own people. But his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. You know, this time of year, we tend to make New Year's resolutions, right? And they tend to revolve around eating better, losing weight, getting in shape. This year, I want to encourage you, as you look into the new year, understand the resolutions that God has made for us, how he has fulfilled his commitments, that he is coming to our rescue, that he's sending his Son, that he has come bringing the Messiah. And make this next year one where you'll resolve to not only putting Jesus on the throne that he deserves to be on, but that you'll keep him there, worshiping at his feet, coming before him, declaring that he is God, that he is King, that he has all glory in the heavens and on the earth, worshiping him with your gifts and with your life. Make this next year one where you commit to fulfilling your promise, to keeping Jesus on the throne. Well, we're going to move into a time of communion, and it's fitting that we do this because the beauty of the stable is also reflecting on the beauty of the cross. Because the truth is that this king that has come is willing to give up his throne and his life so that we can truly be set free.